to go. They've basically burnt all possibilities of finishing the top four because of their last four games, which have been underwhelming. But crazy things have happened. If Villa lose their last two games and Tottenham win their last three games, they can qualify for the Champions League, which is great. But regardless, you should assume that Europa League qualification should be secured because Newcastle, they're 4 points clear of Newcastle with 3 games to go. They're versing two teams in the relegation battle. You'd assume that they win those, and then Newcastle probably can't make up the difference, especially because I think they've got pretty hard games. Brighton United, and Brentford, a couple of pretty good teams. But regardless, this has been I think the last month has clouded a lot of good that Ange has done over the season. I'm seeing on Twitter some Spurs fans not turning on him, but asking the question, what's going on, like, etc., which I think is fair to a certain extent, like losing 4 games in a row to teams who are there or thereabouts in your kind of ballpark, getting spanked by Newcastle, getting dominated, especially in the first, I say dominated, being unclinical and being exposed on the counter-attack against Arsenal, losing to an underwhelming Chelsea side and then being pretty convincingly beaten at Liverpool. 4 results in isolation, which probably aren't too bad, but if you look at them in the stretch of games that they are that they exist in, probably not the best. I think when you look at Spurs, you need to look at it from a more holistic perspective. I don't think there's a manager in the world that could get Spurs in the top 4. Well, there's very few, at least. There's very few managers that could get Spurs in the top 4 with the current squad. I think it's very... The starting 11 is good. Like when Madison's up and running, when Van de Ven's up and running, when like Adogi and Porro and these players are up and running, when Son's up and going, the starting 11 is good, right? And I think the team that they played against Liverpool is relatively close to their full team. Probably a couple of players missing, a couple of pretty crucial players missing. Obviously there was no Madison in this game. And we saw in the start of the season when they were there and when they were at their full strength, they were hard to beat and they were playing pretty good football and they were top of the league and they were flying, right? And then that game against Chelsea, which basically derailed the season. The 2 red cards, Van de Ven and Madison both going down. It was the start of the really downhill cycle for them. But then again, they rebounded pretty well after that loss. Like they lost to Wolves, Villa, drew to City, and then lost to West Ham. But then they won 4 out of the next 5 games. They won their next game in the FA Cup, and they were doing pretty well until this last kind of month of the season. I think it's unfair to... You can't look at this season and look at and express more negative emotions in comparison to positive emotions when it comes to it from looking at it from a Spurs perspective, because that just completely undersells all the external factors and issues that Ange has had to face, like the injuries, like the suspensions, like the fixturing, like the poor run of fixturing at times that they've got. Because realistically, this squad is not a top 4 squad. He was in the top 4 for the majority of the season and has really been challenging for the top 4 for the majority of the season, barring this last month, which has been pretty bad. So I think, look, without wanting to sound too harsh on Ange, without wanting to sound too, lenient on him and kind of blowing smoke up his ass or whatever, when you look at it, they've scored 69 goals, conceded 58, got a plus 11 goal difference. They've actually scored the least amount of goals out of any club in the top 7, but they've also conceded the third least. They've actually conceded the second most goals as well. So it's a pretty it's a pretty clear indication, a pretty predictable indication of where they are at. Attackingly, they're okay, they're fine. Defensively, a little bit weak because I do probably rely a little bit more on individual talent in their defensive half. Van de Ven's and his pace, Romero, these type of players. And the attacking system obviously will take a while to fully click and to fully kind of get functioning. I don't understand the the discourse around Ange this season is one that I expected, but also one that I didn't. Is one that I expected to happen because he was always going to go through a form slump. It wasn't going to be perfect. It wasn't going to be, they weren't going to win every single game. They were going to lose. They were going to lose bad at some stages, but they were also going to win games pretty well as well. So I'm not going to sit here and say that this season and the reaction to this season for Spurs has been different to what I'd say, or bad or worse. But what I will say is that this is exactly where I think Tottenham would have beaten the Reds. Like I said before this season, I wouldn't be surprised if Tottenham get top four, and not everyone, but a lot of people were very critical of that opinion, especially when anyone said, I think Tottenham can make top four. They were like, no way they're going to make top four. All of a sudden, they're sitting in fifth with 3 games to go and they're 7 points off fourth, and now the world's crumbling down because they've bottled it, etc., etc. It goes, hold on. The expectation before the season is being met, essentially, at the end of the season, right? And you could say that, yeah, the expectations can change because of what happens in season. I get that, but they're in a stage of their development where they are still rebuilding, and or to a certain extent, they are still building to something. Like, this is not the final stage of where they're at in their cycle. They're just at the start of a cycle. They've got a lot of young players in this team, they've got a young manager in terms of his cycle within the club. Like, he's still, like, 1 year in his cycle at Spurs, like under a year, so he's still young and still trying to like fully implement himself and his game plan within the squad. They had massive upheaval in the off-season, losing Harry Kane, so another full off-season without him, and to fully train and get used to playing football without him fully for an off-season will help as well a lot. Will help a lot as well, I think. It's one of those things, right, where Spurs are in a position now where they can't be greedy. They can't sit here and say, we expect this X, Y, Z, because they've underperformed for a long time. And last year was a horrendous year for the club, right? And they've brought in Ange, who was a risk. And I said pre-season that it is a risk to back him. But the way you can mitigate this, it is a risk to hire him. The way you can mitigate this risk is by backing him. And by backing him, I don't necessarily mean throwing £400 million in his back pocket and telling him to spend it. I mean, giving him the support, giving him assurance, giving him public assurance that his job is safe and that they're backing him and they're buying into this project. And I think that the messaging of that from the fans and from the club has been relatively strong. I think like that message has been relatively strong and consistent. I will say I think that messaging from the fans has wavered over the last month, which is confusing to me because they've had a month of pretty tough games, and they've like the 4 or 5 months previous to this month have been really good, and they've played some really good football and they've won some good games, and maybe they would have liked to have gone further in the cup competitions maybe. But look, if they finish fifth in Ange's first year, they get Europa League football. They can spend heavily in the summer to get that depth up. I don't necessarily think their starting 11 needs a whole lot of work. I think maybe another attacker, maybe another midfielder, and another defender, like just one starting player in each of those lines, I think elevates them a lot. I just think it's the depth that needs the issues, because we saw when Maddison went down and when Van de Ven went down, where Romero got suspended, when Adogi and Porro and these players are missing, there's a big drop off. So bridging that gap between their best and their second best is probably a little bit more of a priority. And maybe you do that, you do improve that by just spending more for your best players, and then those players who are currently your best players in that position move down to the second rung, and that bridge gets lowered naturally, which is probably the way that they might do it. But I think for Spurs, I mean, I think it's been a successful season. I think objectively speaking, it's been a successful season for Spurs, and I really won't hear otherwise, because they would have liked to have gone further in both cups. But you can't have everything, right? They're probably going to finish fifth. It's like a miracle for them to finish fourth, and it'd be a catastrophe if they finish sixth. They won't finish any higher or lower than that. This is Ange's first season. They've had a lot of injury issues that came in a big portion of the season, like over that Christmas New Year's break. They had half of their squad out basically, and that cost them a lot of games. They've had some unlucky runs with injuries in other portions of the season. They've played some really good football at times and have won some important games quite comfortably, but then that flip side of the poor run of games and the playing and being exposed on the counter-attack is something that we all knew was going to happen, especially if you understand the way that Ange plays and the way that his tactics develop over time. There's that short-term pain for the eventual long-term goal once everyone fully buys into the system, once everyone fully is implemented into the system. I think you cannot say it's anything other than a successful season for Spurs based on the preseason expectations, where people would laugh at you if you said that Spurs would finish top four, and now they're only 7 points away from that with 3 games to go. Well, they probably won't get it. They're still a lot closer than what a lot of people thought they'd be. So I don't necessarily think that I don't necessarily think that you can say that this is a failure, and I think it's very harsh, if anything, to say that it's a failure, because you can't expect the world from a coach like Ange in the first season. He's not like a Conte where you expect results straight away. He's a project manager. This squad is currently through like a development period that he's going to need time to develop. I mean, we saw Arteta, right? His first 2 seasons were pretty underwhelming, and then the 3rd season, bang, title challenge. 4th season, bang, they're top of the league with 2 games to go. They might win the league. So it takes time, it takes money, and it takes patience, and it takes backing from the supporters and from the club, which for a club like Spurs, who were very, very patient with Poch, and that didn't lead them to ultimate glory. They were harsh with Mourinho, they were harsh with Conte. They got rid of both of them quick, smart. I think, how am I going to say this now? And Nuno as well, forgot about him. They need to revert back to the mentality they had under Poch, but this time, don't be scarred by the memories. Embrace that again and go with it again, because I think that's where the success is going to come, in my opinion. That's where the success is going to come, because it's not going to come like that. It's going to take time, and it's going to take patience, and it's going to take a lot of hurt as well. It's going to take some painful results, like the last month have been. But I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, because good things come to those who wait, and nothing comes quickly, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's my 2 cents on Spurs, because I was very vocal of them preseason, and I just kind of waited to see how they've trudged along and where they've finished up before I give my full thoughts on them.